Well, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Alexis Gambis. I'm the artistic director of Labocine, and we're delighted to be here today for our Labocine live series. And just to give you a little bit of background on the platform is somewhat of a hybrid between a video on demand platform, kind of an art house niche, but also we're really interested in creating a conversation between scientists, artists, and filmmakers. And so we have a lot of content that explores scientific ideas, either visually, sonically, or through story, and things that are a little bit outside of the box of how we kind of think of science communication sometimes. And so we run a few live events on a monthly basis, and we're so delighted to be here today with Mike. Mike Maryniuk, right? Do I
Yeah,
pronounce it well?
yeah, that's great.
And Mike made this amazing film, The Goose. Mike is a Canadian filmmaker from Winnipeg, live from Winnipeg right now. Who, I was reading a little bit about your bio. I hate reading bios, but kind of like a self virtuoso filmmaker, very interested in kind of exploring kind of new ways of using collage and kind of handicraft and home cooked and arcades. And it's just, this film is The Goose is just an amazing visual psychedelic journey. And I think it's a really amazing way of also depicting the interior lives of characters, like what they're thinking, and kind of getting into these internal states. And I think it's a perfect fit for what we do, and we're so delighted to have you, Mike. And we're just to give you, before we start the conversation, The Goose is right now on our platform today and tomorrow as part of the live cinema event. It's totally free. You just have to sign up and hit play, and hopefully you can watch it. And we're so delighted to have you, Mike. So welcome to Labocine.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Mike, tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about this film. So this film is, well, before we get into the film, tell us a little bit about how things have been going for you in these times. I feel like that's kind of like a typical opening. How have you been doing? Have you been creating any work? What's the latest on these pandemic inspirational times?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a few things. I still work as a freelance camera person, and so I just was filming two scientists, or one I'm doing later today, and he is an expert on sea ice, and the other I did twice. Once it didn't work because it was too cold, and I froze all my fingers. I had like frostbite blisters. We ended up doing it inside, but during the pandemic, it's easier to do things outside. So there's that. And I finished a film which is almost a companion to The Goose for the National Film Board called June Night. And that was made all with paper cutouts and with plants growing in time lapse. And it stars Buster Keaton. And so using kind of older footage, reimagining that footage that's in the public domain. And so that's actually available on the National Film Board site. It's called June Night. It's out now. It's on their YouTube site as well. And I just finished with my blistered fingers with a music video for Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers, who did the score for The Goose. He just put out a new album 30 years after his first album, The History of Dogs. And it's out on Joyful Noise Recordings, and it comes out, I think, today, tomorrow. The video is available on Friday. So, wow. And it's basically me puppeteering this in reverse with a bunch of chiclets stuck to the bottom of my hand that I super glued. And yeah, I'm double jointed, so I've been doing this reverse face for since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you have limitations on time, budget, and resources, you kind of revert to these ideas that you had as a child, or at least that's what I do, and then send them out into the world.
So Mike, so much to talk about, but because I want to kind of peer into your brain and understand your process. But let's talk a little bit about the Goose. So the Goose is the story of this kind of a mute young man who's kind of on a journey of kind of self-discovery and tries to, you know, kind of teams up with kind of this escape artist. And it's kind of a film both about and you know, please add to this, but it's both a film about him trying to understand the world, but also about, you know, miscommunication, about trying to connect with people, and also this really amazing interior world that this character has in the film. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the film and kind of in your own words. I'm just kind of curious. I mean, you know, it's always hard to talk about our films, and this one is definitely you know, yeah, I'd love to hear a few of like your thoughts about the Goose, especially now with a bit more of a distance, of a goose distance to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a big thing. The separating yourself over time from a project in the moment and in the moments leading up to like a festival premiere, I you're just lost in what it actually is or could be, and you've reached a saturation point where you can't almost think about it or come up with that proper bio. And Yeah, I think fundamentally it's about miscommunication, and but for me it was a project that like stalled a few times on the way and was kind of denied the go ahead, and so it morphed and it changed, and it's through like some life events it's morphed as well. And then because it ended up being made through like a non-traditional way through just like arts funding in Canada, I felt like I just had the elbow room to take whatever I was kind of feeling at the time and kind of find a way to infuse it within it. And what I did was I created these 3 or 4 spots in the film where I was going to just explore ideas through like dream sequences and stuff like that, and then try and put in major plot points right into like a more in a surreal dream-like setting. And so that was the structure moving forward. And then the Goose he doesn't talk, and but he understands everyone. And I was kind of inspired by nicknames. Okay, my mother's maiden name was Gislason, and we're Icelandic, and her nickname was Geese, and so was her sister's. And then I thought I was thinking about it, and I knew a few people who had these interesting nicknames, and I would ask them where they got their nickname from. And it always came from childhood traumatic events, and somehow they stayed with them, and they
Sticks,
were
yeah, it sticks with you. Yeah.
and people were not able to shed these nicknames throughout, or never really kind of stood up for themselves. And I'll give you one example, and it's fairly crude, but there's a musician in Winnipeg that I worked with, played in a bluegrass band, and he played a muck bucket, which is like a stand-up bass that is made, and it's based on like kind of southern homemade instruments.
Mm.
His name was Twisty, and so he plays in a band, and I thought it had something to do with him rolling his own cigarettes or rolling whatever. And
Right.
but it turned out when I asked him, he didn't really want to talk about it, but then he did tell me. And as a child, he fell off of his bike on these monkey trails, which is like where kids ride bikes, and his one of his testicles was got caught in the chain of his bike.
Oh my God,
And
that's
what, and I just was like, how did you continue like to, like everyone calls him Twisty and
yeah.
he owns it, right? And so then I was thinking about who I'd encountered with weird nicknames, and I won't get into this guy's story, but there was a referee. I played kind of amateur hockey in Canada, and there was a referee who would ref games at in the evening, and he wasn't okay. He was not. He was fairly nonverbal, and I think it came through circumstance. It wasn't that he had hearing problems, and but he was able to do all the referee signs, and he would ref these hockey games.
Mm.
And so I was inspired by him. He was kind of a strange character, and no one really understood him because he didn't speak, but everyone knew him as this referee. And then he would hang out with these guys after a hockey game, after having ref, and he had a kind of an odd mustache, and strange looking fellow. And I ran into him in Winnipeg now 30 or 20 years later, and he was, still wearing his like graduation jacket, as 20 years later. An odd character. And so that's kind of where it all started. um,
So, Mike, tell me a little bit. So you were mentioning that, you know, that the funding was also kind of like a, you know, an aggregate of different elements coming together. But
yeah,
you mentioned something which was interesting, is that you carve out kind of the story, but then you leave holes, right, for like these dreamscapes, these moments of kind of, you know, daydreaming. And do you have a kind of a sense of, you know, like kind of the story of him, you know, because at the end of the day it's kind of like it's kind of a bit of a road trip as well, right? You know, it
yeah,
has that element to it as well. Did you have a clear sense of, you know, this is the story and these are the moments where I'm gonna, yeah, did you have kind of an overall idea what the story was, or was that kind of something that you started building upon as you were shooting maybe?
yeah. Okay, for sure. The original idea had kind of probably is like the story of how the Goose came to be, and that was the original script, and this would have been the last act of it.
Mm.
So I had to kind of shorten it, and then hopefully I thought I could, put in some of those elements. Uh, the dummy, the like ventriloquist dummy, uh, is wearing a referee costume. So in the original
Yeah.
script, that was the Goose was like a referee uh,
Mm.
as well. But so I knew that I had to shorten it, and I had to make it fit within the budget and all these things. Where it was a crew of mostly three people making the film, and so, but yeah, I did understand where it was going to go. And then I really want to explore also, at the same time, my brother was living with brain cancer, and
Mm.
and ultimately passed away from it.
Mm.
And so I wanted to kind of like explore that a little bit. And, so that was important to me as well.
Mm.
And, my cousin, who was born 1 month apart from me, also passed away on that time, around
Mm.
that time. So I wanted to kind of like somehow honor them, and they're both the kind of red-haired Icelanders within and that's where me focusing on the Goose was kind of important. Geese
Mm.
being Giselson being the maiden name, those types of things. So it became intensely personal as well. So I was kind of
Mm.
like taking things out of, lived experience,
Right.
and, you know, reflections on the medical system, reflections on hope,
Yeah.
hopelessness, alternative medicine, kind of like Yeah, because when you're diagnosed with terminal cancer, uh,
Mm.
your doctor says there's no hope. Where do you go, right?
Right.
You turn to and you start to get advice from everyone around you.
Right.
I know he got advice like once that he should cut his arm, stick some peas like
Mhm.
vegetables under the skin, and then sew it back up, close it, and then 2 weeks later take the peas out, and that would somehow, help him. Uh, and so every single person has their own uh, holistic
Right.
approach that they want to do to try and save your life, right?
Right.
And so that there's that element, the hope balloon that comes up and then pops and stuff like that. Yeah, and so it's kind of a journey of like hope and hopelessness, right? And at the beginning, there's elements of like toxic masculinity and like being tough, and
Mm.
so those are personal
Yeah,
experiences as
especially in
well.
that and kind of that club scene, right? Like you get those kind of those. Yeah, you kind of enter into that kind of like masculinity kind of world of those men kind of dancing and yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
especially
exactly.
love the guy who's doing the coat check, who's just kind of like in his own world there. Yeah.
That's right. That's a most of the actors that are in the film are like filmmakers in Winnipeg, and so
Oh wow.
that's a filmmaker, Greg Hannock, who his film Downtime is kind of a pre-mumblecore film that played at
Oh
in
gosh.
in Berlin in 1982. Yeah, I mean, there's probably 25 Winnipeg filmmakers in the film. There were four people who ran for mayor as a joke that were in the film.
Right.
There were five people who ran for the Rhino Party. I'm not sure if
Oh
the Rhino
yeah.
Party is a party that is basically making fun of the political process.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The boxer or the dad, that's kind of tough guy with the wild eyes, who looks like Nick Nolte or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
he's
In
a
that apartment. Yeah.
Yeah, he's his name is Washboard Hank, and he's a musician and children's entertainer as well.
Wow.
He ran for the Rhino Party. The inventor character is also a children's entertainer who
With the fax
also.
with the fax machine. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So there's just a collection of the weirdest people I could find, or the people that I really actually have enormous respect for.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Al,
look,
yeah,
I want to get into this whole Winnipeg collective because that's so fascinating to me. But before we get, let me ask you a little bit about I mean, the, in these holes that you create in the film. So, there are many kind of visual styles, right? There's kind of the like retro futurist. There's a lot of things going on there, and I'm just curious to understand like how do you build these things? Do you do this like at home? Do you have like different rooms where it's like this is the room for like handicraft, this is the room where I'm going to do more of the arcade stuff? Like I'm just interested in, you're kind of like a George Méliès but like a Winnipeg. You have like all these like illusionary, but what's beautiful about the visual world that you create is that it feels very tactile. you know there's like elements of it that feel, it never gets into it never feels like CGI or kind of, you're very kind of aware of the handicraft aspect of it, and even kind of those shots of the goose, at the top of the screen, like where you have kind of that goose like chasing him. I'm curious, do you have kind of an idea of like these are the different visual palettes that I'm going to incorporate into the dreams, or is that more of just like, let me start mixing things together? Yeah, if you could kind of give us a
yeah,
insight into that world.
yeah. I mean, so each dream had kind of a theme that it started with. So there was one dream that was I knew the kind of like backbone of it, and I almost treated it like a music video. Um, so the backbone of one dream is the concept of freezing to death. So I
Mm,
knew that I would have, images of like just a pair of gloves sticking out of a snowbank, and maybe they're moving in the wind. And then I would film ice forming and stuff like that. And then I would kind of like put some things that I was trying to explore within it. The idea of Christmas and, Christmas lights would end up in it, and kind of like a dystopian version of Christmas. So it would be like a snowman made out of pumpkins and things like that. So that's kind of the starting point. And then, there are just things that we have. So at the time, we had a pretty big studio,
mm,
and it was in the basement under a warehouse of costumes. Uh, yeah, so there was lots of stuff, and there was also a uh, like a technology graveyard, like a recycling depot just across from us. So we would like get to the studio and we would like look and there'd be this giant like fax machine or something like that, and we'd be like, Great, this is this is what we're going to use."
right.
Or we, so the idea of like uh being faxed or whatever is probably comes from you know found materials, and often that's I'm inspired by materials that I find at secondhand stores or that I come across, and I just look at it and I go, this is this one thing that this item can do. Why
Mm,
not try something out? Like right behind us is that rug,
yeah,
the two cats.
yeah.
We bought that because it was ridiculous and because it was folk art. Uh, but then I was like, well, what can you even do with that? I mean, I'd love to have it
Mm,
in the film. So while we were on set, when the crew members went for supper, I was like, I animated a few of the carpets like moving, and so
like moving around. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
basically that process is just you take a frame and then you like you just move a little bit of carpet, take another
Yeah,
frame, move a little bit
yeah.
more. Yeah, so it feels like it's alive and stuff like that. So that was just something that
It
was,
it seems
yeah,
that sometimes like the objects that you have, whether it's like something that you find kind of informs like, okay, what can I do with this? And it kind of gives you the idea of like the object is how you kind of start brainstorming of what is how can I like move it around, or how is it malleable? That that's pretty fascinating to me, is that it's kind of like like a cave of like objects that you kind of figure out like, oh, okay, how do I incorporate this fax machine or this rug with the two cats and into this story, which is
yeah.
pretty amazing.
The thing about it too is then it also creates this these there are rules to the universe, right?
Yeah,
And one of the rules in the universe is that um, that there are ghosts, or there are just that there's something else going on, right? That
yeah,
there's something else trying to intervene, or there's something. So the idea that these rugs are coming alive is fits into that kind of like these rules of the universe. So I
yeah,
think that like that's a pretty big step to like creating something strange, is there have to be some limitations, right?
yeah,
So there are some things that I wanted to use that were great, but they didn't fit into the universe,
yeah.
believe
What
it or
about
not.
so Mike, what about because it seems that also those universes are very much attached to different characters, right? That the characters are definitely how I'm curious to know how much does especially the main actor, what's his name what's the actor's name?
Rob Crooks, the Goose.
Yeah, Rob Crooks. Yeah, the Goose. I'm curious to know whether or not you spoke to him also about like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do this is going to be like your dream sequence, you know, because there are moments where he's like holding a bomb, like there are moments where he's in the dream, or moments where you kind of depict his brain, or you know, kind of different types of, you know, experiments that are done on him. But how involved was the actor in, you know, in the output of these like internal worlds that he's living? Or was he not at all involved, or didn't know what you were kind of plotting behind his back? Yeah.
Yeah, well, often it was like there was a large portion of the film where we shot with like a small crew of people, but then after that, that process continued almost forever with just me and him. And so we
Mm,
would go to, we would drive outside of the city anticipating northern lights. And so, you know, I was watching the KP index, and I was, all of a sudden I'm like, we're going right now. So things like that. And also, you know, he would have a chance to, we would talk about it on the way there if it wasn't clear before that. So like, you know, I knew that I should have like images of him actually kind of in his own version of a boxing ring at a certain point.
mm,
And, you know, I said, I'm going to shoot it on 16mm, and this is how I'm going to like, this is how I'm going to process it. And then I'm going to do these fun things to it. And he was really interested in that technique. And then he would ask me why I'm doing that. And then we would get there, and I'd be like, okay, we're not doing it on 16, we're doing it at high eights, and we're doing it on this setting that's like night setting, and it's going to look green. You're going to have these big wall eyes, and it's going to be great. And, you know, so he as much as I could explain things, you know, I because it's just me, I can abandon all those plans and just work in the moment with what I think is really interesting.
mm,
And so that was something. I mean, we spoke at length about, he's a friend, and you know, he's wasn't an actor, he's a performer, he's a musician actually.
mm,
And he he just had kind of the right look, the qualities. I thought he could be quiet, he could emote, he was a natural performer. And yeah, so I thought it would be good. He was heavily committed to it. He was, yeah. Once we got through the second day, he was absolutely fully in there.
mm, mm. It's, yeah, it must not be an easy role because of the fact that, you know, he's obviously not speaking, and it's a lot of it. The question was also because a lot of it is like his miscommunication, or moments of connection with certain characters in the film, but also moments where he kind of drifts away, you know, and then he kind of like, and then seeing him come back to the reality of what's happening. And so he's terrific in the film. I think he's definitely has kind of this physical comedy aspect to him as well, you know, in terms of like the way he is. The other question I had for you, Mike, was, well, it seems, and just because we were just speaking about that, it seems that a lot of your projects are personal films, but also you're very kind of interested in bringing together, right, like a collective, right, of different artists that you admire, and of course in this case also about, you know, in this case dealing with like personal loss of your brother, and these types of questions. But it seems like your work is very, you know, for lack of a better word, but it's very collaborative, and you're also paying homage to like other artists in the film. And I find that fascinating. And I just wondering if you could speak a little bit about, you know, when you're crafting the film and you're saying, okay, the coat man is going to be this guy. He's going to be
Yeah.
perfect. Like, how do you go about in bringing together this kind of family of artists and filmmakers and people that, you know, to have cameos in your film?
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes from, you know, I worked at the Winnipeg Film Group for quite a long time, as the production coordinator. And so I thought it was, although it wasn't part of my job description, to understand what the history of the organization was. And, you know, beyond the history of the organization, because history is fickle and history is written by certain people. And so as I found kind of more underdogs and people that were forgotten about, I realized that it was the history that is on the website and is being told is very different. It's just the history of winners, right?
Right.
And it was the losers, so to speak, that were more interesting. And so that's a theme that is in the film as well. Now, these are not there are no winners or losers in a collective, right? Uh, when it's not a competition, being a part of a arts collective. And so that's, I understand how that kind of like a healthy collective of people should work, and that isn't through competition or through kind of like talking behind someone's back just because they had success and stuff like that. So, and it's celebrating, or finding reasons to celebrate everyone for different reasons. And so yeah, so this kind of ends up with like a cast of misfits, and people that you know uh, weren't celebrated in the same way that the so-called best of us were. So there's that, and then it's just I think it also comes from like I also make documentary film, and documentary filmmaking changed my life for sure, because it turns you into if you if you weren't empathetic before you were a documentary filmmaker, you that is the point that you either succeed or fail when you can't, so being having access to ask someone that you don't know their whole life story, and be able to participate in a conversation that is can go through the highs and lows of that is really taught me a lot, and really gave me a new sense of how to treat people and how to listen to people. And so that was pretty important too. I would recommend, like, I think, I mean, I'm a big advocate for, like documentary filmmaking in schools, and
Mm.
like in elementary schools, and, of course, animation.
Mm.
And
As kind of like a form of empathy, right? With like
totally.
teaching. Yeah, that's a good point. So my last question, because these are kind of relatively short little conversation, but one of the things that I noticed is, despite, I'm always interested in, you were talking about documentary, I'm always interested in how people frame work. It's like, oh, Mike's film is, it's quite experimental. It's an experimental film. I always find that so amusing or even when people talk about hybrid film, it's like, oh, that's a docu-fiction piece, or that's a ethno-fiction, or that's a because they don't fully understand how to like consolidate or box it into like a specific category. But what's amazing about your film is that the experimental aspect to it is also kind of a film that is paying tribute to being stuck in these kind of internal, not being able to communicate, right? So the experimental nature is somewhat, it's not gratuitous. It's like justified. It's the way he thinks about the world. Um, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about like people saying like, oh, Mike is an experimental filmmaker. Or Mike is, I know that you're going to do something about ice in an hour or so, but how do you feel about that, about your work kind of being framed in a specific way, or being like, oh, this is quite an experimental psychedelic journey that we're going through?
Yeah, I mean, it's the it's the upside or downside of creating anything, is that people are going to try and put it into some sort of box. And I've had these conversations, like this film was played at like genre festivals,
Right.
and is also played at, as part of the like Way Out kind of. Oh, actually, after it played in Rotterdam at the festival, it came back 6 months later and played in a club called it was called Stonerama, and it was basically, yeah, it was like it played in a weed club.
Amazing.
And yeah,
I,
I
I
mean,
want to go there. Yeah.
yeah, and so I mean, the guy was at the screening, and he asked me, and I thought, well, this is going to be a great story. But so yeah, it's played in different parts, and sometimes I get a message saying, you know, we love your film, but there's no place for us to put it on our festival, and I guess that's fine too. Uh, but yeah, I mean, there's has to be there's I like the fact that it doesn't always fit, and that it kind of challenges people to kind of find a place to put it, or yeah, I mean, I think that that's something I'll continue with. You know, is uh, there's so many films that are just reimagining of like a Hollywood classic, or it's the same stories being told, you know, just with in a different region or something. It's the Baltimore version of, you know, New York, New York. I don't know. So, you know, yeah, it's one of those things that is necessary, and it's kind of for everyone else. Sometimes like there's a term that gets used that I kind of like allow myself to use, is fun formalism.
Mm.
And because I came out of the experimental kind of movement in Winnipeg, hand processing 16 millimeter film, and it was kind of an extension of my own research into the 1920s silent comedies. And my main objective with that research was because I came across 35 posters from 1926 during a demolition of a shoe store in Winnipeg. So there were all these images from these silent comedies, and so I was interested in. I was already making kind of like videos and stuff like that, and yeah, I knew enough to understand what these images, what the type of makeup they were wearing, the era. So I stopped the demolition and I climbed up, and then they actually, in the like the excavator, the bucket, it was half collapsed, and I would have fallen into 2 stories into a bunch of like tangled,
Oh my gosh.
you know, like pieces of metal and stuff. So they brought the big claw, and I jumped into that with these posters, and then he like moved me to the road. And,
Do you have any documentation of that retrieval, or no? Was it recorded? No.
oh no, I mean, I hope not. I really hope not.
With maybe a surveillance camera somewhere in
Yeah, no, I've yeah. It was. I mean, I still have the posters, which is they're kind of holy to me almost. But
Yeah, I noticed that. I mean, we didn't talk about all of the kind of, but I noticed that there's also a lot of, you were talking about processing 16 million, but I know that there's a lot of kind of paper cutting and a lot of, you know, usage of posters and motifs in the film, and also playing around with kind of like pulsating poster, like animating posters, and playing with like the pixelization of poster. I thought, yeah, it's really, it felt to me that there was a lot of yeah, kind of a tribute to like the poster, you know,
yeah,
to posters in general, and kind of the art of representing film. I thought was really beautiful in that as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
What? Let me. What? The last question I have for you, and we could
Yep.
speak hours, is, you know, one of the things that we're interested in our platform is changing the perception of like what is a science film. You know, I think right now, because of, you know, whatever, because of the pandemic, you know, some people are compelled to make films about the pandemic. You know, other people think it's a bit too soon to kind of tackle those issues. But I was wondering, in your case, do you consider, are you drawn, this is a question that I kind of ask, are you drawn to like kind of scientific, I mean, we were talking a little bit about your loss and everything, but are you drawn to, you also talked about like holistic ideas, but is science something that you think about when you work, like scientific topics or themes, or because for me, when I watch your film, I'm like, oh, this is like, I would consider it to be highly scientific and also like an experiment in itself. But I was just wondering, like, what are your thoughts about that kind of your affinity to science and the work that you do?
Yeah, so one of the things about this film was there are aspects of an abandoned documentary that ended up in it as well, and that was based on backyard scientists.
Wow.
So a few of those backyard scientists' ideas are actually in the film. One of the people that I was going to have involved was this farmer who was involved in a study on dandelions, and there was a big at the University of Sudbury in Canada. It's a big bursary on that study, and so dandelions end up in the film, and it was dandelions essentially working to alkalize or normalize your pH through alkalization, stuff like that. So there's that. And then there's a filmmaker, Andrew Milne, whose machine that you see at the end is actually it's actually a photocopy projector, and so it spins around big stack of papers, and it has their like all single frames, and then it projects an actual moving image through paper, and then it has a feed side. He constructed that whole thing himself, so I was going to feature him as well. And yeah, and I always say if the inventor in the film, if I lost my leg in a car accident or something, I would rather get Andrew, who made that machine, and Al Simmons, the inventor, to come up with something more interesting than a new leg. What's the
Right.
point? What's the point of just getting another leg? Why not get something way more
Like,
interesting?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
those are a few things.
yeah, there's definitely kind of it feels like you're also interested in kind of concepts of technology, but also kind of like remedy, like how how we think about curing ourselves, and it's interesting because when we think of kind of like this do-it-yourself science, it's becoming more and more kind of part of our culture. People want to take control over their own bodies, and we hear a lot about these conversations are definitely very kind of prominent, and can rub can there can be friction with the science community that's always like, oh, what are you doing? But it's definitely something that's kind of growing. For example, there are people that want to inject like CRISPR and like genetically modify themselves, and all kinds of things that we can speak about. Mike, tell us a little bit to end. Where can we? Well, I know the Goose is on the platform, but where can we learn more about your own work? And of course, you're now part of our weird family here. But where can we? Yeah, if we wanted to learn more about what you're doing, where do we
Yeah,
go?
yeah.
So apart from Stonerama, which would be the first place that I would go to, but
Yeah, I know. I wish I'd been able to attend that. Yeah, I mean, I would say like to see most of my work, 90% of it is on my Vimeo channel, and I would encourage people to look at that. I know there's so it's a combination of my films, music videos, and there's a new music video coming out on Friday in on Joyful Noise Recordings. It's the Paul Leary video for Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers, who did the score for the film, and it's yeah, it's called Gary Floyd Revisited. Is the track. Yeah, I mean those are probably the best places. And then just all my stuff is available through the Winnipeg Film Group as well. Uh,
amazing.
yeah,
Well, Mike, it's a pleasure having you, and definitely check out the Goose and please continue sending us your amazing films. We would love to feature and maybe one day do like a little kind of retrospective of some of the work that you've been working on. But thank you so much for this conversation. It was super fun.
Yeah, it's thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of this platform, and yeah, the concept for it as well is so rich, and I think it's actually the most important thing that what art and science mix is where new ideas come from. So congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike.